From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced his decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. Going against advices from the European allies, President Trump said he was reimposing full economic sanctions on Iran and pulling the United States out of the international agreement. This leaves any foreign companies trying to do business with Iran in a difficult position.
In a few moments, I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating U.S. nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime. We will be instituting the highest level of economic sanction. Any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States. America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail.
And Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has said his country will negotiate with European countries, Russia and China, about remaining in the nuclear deal despite the U.S. withdrawal from the agreement.
I have ordered the Foreign Ministry to negotiate with European countries, China and Russia in coming weeks. If at the end of this short period we conclude that we can fully benefit from the JCPOA with cooperation of all countries, the deal will remain. But if our interests are not protected, we will announce the Islamic Republic's decision.
EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini is calling for the international community to stick to the Iran nuclear deal.
The nuclear deal with Iran is crucial for the security of the region, of Europe, and of the entire world. As long as Iran continues to implement its nuclear-related commitments, as it is doing so far, the European Union will remain committed to the continued full and effective implementation of the nuclear deal.
Now moving to Argentina, where President Mauricio Macri has announced that he began talks with the International Monetary Fund to receive a line of financial support. Macri is negotiating with the IMF for a $30 billion credit line as the nation's bonds, stocks, and currency all plunge. Macri said the government's fiscal plan depends a lot on external financing and that in the face of changes in the international context, they must resort to the help of international organizations.
I'm convinced
that we are following the only path we have to overcome difficult times and avoid an economic crisis that could harm our nation. In order to do this, we have applied a gradualistic economic policy to balance the disastrous public accounts, taking care of the most vulnerable people and at the same time developing more jobs opportunities for all. This economic policy depends on international investment. During the first 2 years, we had a positive global context, but this has changed. The global economic conditions are more challenging for us since the rise of oil prices and global interest rates. These external factors harm our economy because we are a country that depends exclusively on international investment after the enormous public debt left by the past administration. As a result, I have decided to hold talks with the International Monetary Fund to reach an agreement and obtain financing support to work on new economic development programs.
Meanwhile, some are saying Argentina's currency crisis reveals just how fragile Macri's neoliberal economic policies really are.
The rise of the dollar price in recent days is shaking Argentina's economy, in spite of the government promises to take action to deal with the situation. For example, increasing bank interest rates to 40%. The value of food and other necessities are rapidly outpricing worker salaries, drawing the country deeper into recession.
They are taking us down a road that they know that leads to worse days. Government policies are not moving forward, and that's something deeply concerning.
The instability of the dollar makes it harder to achieve the fiscal goals for this year. The government tries to reduce the cost of the dollar by making cuts of $30 billion in the public budget. However, many analysts think that the problems won't stop.
All of this shows us how imbalanced the situation with the dollar is. This is mainly a financial bomb. purposefully installed by the central bank, and they justify it with the fight against inflation, which already failed, with a fragile economy built by the government.
The leaks in the economy just won't stop, and this fiscal disorder is just making things worse. The price of the dollar is already the same as in 2001. Meanwhile, as the central bank struggles to control the situation, the country has lost $5.3 billion from its national reserves, and more than $7.7 billion since they started financial measures in March.
This crisis comes during a time when big finance comes and goes from Argentina. This makes a dramatic economic turn that forces the government to apply even worse policies that will reduce the budget for public works and will make the interest rates even bigger, complicating things for the manufacturing sector and smaller companies.
Even if Macri overcomes these issues, the economic crisis will take its toll. The increase of the dollar's value will have terrible consequences with regards to economic activities. Since January, inflation increased by 7.4%, and it is expected that by the end of the year, it will be as high as 24%. This is a deeply concerning situation for the Argentine economy.
The president of Ecuador, Lenín Moreno, has demanded that his entire cabinet resign in order to evaluate their performance and their political stance, as he is about to end his first year in office. Moreno's personal secretary announced it on Twitter, owing to the fact that several of Moreno's ministers had served in former administration of President Rafael Correa, with whom Moreno has had strong differences. 2 weeks ago, Moreno replaced the ministers of Defense and the Interior over the crisis on the Colombian border. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro responded to U.S. Vice President Mike Pence and said neither he nor President Donald Trump will be able to decide on the political future of Venezuela. This came after Pence criticized the upcoming elections in Venezuela. Maduro said only the Venezuelan people will elect their president in direct and open elections. Wearing an indigenous headdress with feathers, Maduro was accompanied by members of the indigenous community in the state of Amazonas and asked for their blessing and support.
El pueblo unido.
The people united will never be defeated.
Así debemos estar siempre.
That's how we should always be, the people united, mobilized with a great conscience of what we're defending. The rights of the whole country, the right to have a future. On May 20th, we'll decide that, if Venezuela continues to be a free, sovereign and independent country, or if it becomes colony belonging to the US and those who want to betray the nation.
Maduro also called on Venezuelans to vote for peace, remembering the violence caused by the right-wing opposition last year.
Prepararnos para que el 20 de mayo.
We have to prepare for May 20th with a great victory. And all I ask of you is this: support to consolidate peace. Do you want the Guarimbas to return to Venezuela? Then vote for peace on May 20th.
In an interview with RT, Venezuelan ambassador to the OAS, Samuel Moncada, has rejected what he calls extortion by the United States. The diplomat accused the U.S. of applying a policy of calculated cruelty against Venezuela. Moncada rejected unilateral coercive measures applied by Washington, which he says violate international law and which are an attempt to rekindle the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America.
Yo recordaba el domingo pasado, apenas el 6 de mayo, esa solicitud es nulo. Sin embargo, están acostumbrados como dueños de esa organización, se comportan como los dueños de esa organización, a hacer todo tipo de trampas para lograr sus objetivos. Yo recordaba...
Venezuelan independent candidate Luis Ratti has endorsed leading opposition presidential contender Henry Falcón. At a joint event, Falcón and Ratti called on two other opposition candidates, Javier Bertucci and Reinaldo Quijada, to put the interests of Venezuela above personal ones. He urged the contenders to join forces to run against leading candidate Nicolás Maduro.
Desde aquí, también nuestro llamado.
And so here I also want to call on other candidates. I refer to candidate Quijada and candidate Bertucci. Dear brothers, we are at a historic moment. Before our country, we will leave a mark for future generations. We cannot bet on nothing. It is the hour for true unity.
And Venezuelan President Maduro says that if he wins the election on May 20th, he wants to start a broad national dialogue and to restart talks with the opposition in the Dominican Republic. Ian Bruce, our correspondent in Caracas, explains how the government has already decided to implement election guarantees demanded by the opposition during the last round of talks in Santo Domingo, even though at the last minute the opposition refused to sign this agreement.
Venezuelans rehearse for the election of a new president and regional assemblies on the 20th of May. After more than 20 elections since the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution in 1998, voting has become something of a habit here.
All of the expert electoral bodies of the continent have been witness since 2004 to the way we have automated the electoral process and implemented ever greater guarantees so that the electorate can trust their electoral system.
But these elections are different. They include additional guarantees, precisely those demanded by the opposition. And they've been brought forward also as the opposition requested. To understand why, we need to go back a couple of years. After Venezuela's opposition parties won control of the National Assembly in December 2015, they proposed a three-pronged strategy to get rid of the Bolivarian government. Street protests, increasingly violent ones, were intended to bring down the government. They also called for a recall referendum to remove President Nicolas Maduro. And they insisted on immediate presidential elections. By July 2017, with the election of a constituent assembly, the first two plans had failed. The opposition was left with its call for an immediate presidential election. They said they couldn't wait until the scheduled date of December 2018. The government launched a new attempt at dialogue in the Dominican Republic, mediated by the former Spanish Premier José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero. In December that year, the opposition finally joined the talks. By this February, the two sides seemed to have reached an agreement, which had elections as one central point. The government agreed to almost all the new guarantees sought by the opposition. For the first time, international observers will be invited from the United Nations and other international bodies. All candidates will be ensured equal access to the media. That included an acceptance by President Maduro to suspend his presidential broadcasts, known as cadenas, long a feature of Venezuelan political life. The electoral authority would return to their original location those voting centres moved as a result of violent protests. The opposition had argued this prejudiced their supporters. There were also agreements to provide security for all the candidates.
The Santo Domingo Agreement, the agreement of democratic and peaceful coexistence, was not signed by the opposition at the last moment. What's more, it included as the new element to bring forward the elections, which the opposition agreed. In fact, they are the ones that asked for it. But then the government asked if they were ready to guarantee that they would recognize the results.
The opposition now decided it would boycott the elections unless they were moved back to December, the date it had previously rejected. President Maduro said he would implement the agreement anyway, including the extra electoral guarantees.
And I will fulfill all of its parts. Here's the agreement made in the Dominican Republic.
This is one man who has benefited from the opposition's comings and goings. Henry Falcon, the main opposition figure who decided to run for the presidency, says the abstentionist parties are destined to disappear. Ian Bruce, Telesur, Caracas.
We'll be taking a short break, but join us again after this short video from our multimedia team.
style.
Welcome back. Police in Brazil have confirmed that student and LGBTI activist Mateus Passarelli was killed in Rio de Janeiro. Our correspondent André Vieira in Rio has the details.
Rio de Janeiro's police force has confirmed that the 21-year-old art student Mateus Passarelli, who was reported missing since April 9th, was reported to be in one of the poorest favelas in the city. She was killed by a gang organization that controlled the favela. This situation comes after the military intervention of Rio, which raised many concerns since they cannot prevent crimes like the one against Passarelli or the atrocious attack against Maria Franco. In fact, the crime rates against LGBTQI community members have risen by 30% since 2016, and even more so after the militarization of the city.
That was André Vieira from Brazil. Leaders from over 20 Latin American and Caribbean countries are in Cuba to discuss issues affecting the whole region, including sustainable development and inequality. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel spoke at the meeting by the ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean.
It is necessary to transform the inequality culture linked to the colonial past of our nations, which particularly affects indigenous people, Afro-descendants, girls, and women. It is also, in our opinion, a consequence of imperialist and neoliberal economic policies that for decades have benefited transnational companies and strengthened difference due to class and race, and between territories, and between urban and rural populations. The Paris Accords begin a path for all of us to fight against climate change, which affects everyone, but especially the Caribbean countries, where this threat is much bigger and puts us at risk. We need special measures to protect our economy, and at the same time, more cooperation, more solidarity and development.
Delegates also attended a forum in the Convention Center in Havana, where leaders presented a new development plan for the region. Here's our correspondent Laura Prada with her report.
Hello, yes, nice to greet you from Havana. Indeed, we continue here at this second day of work of the 37th session of ECLAC here in Havana. Right now took place the opening ceremony where Alicia Bárcena, the secretary of ECLAC, took the word, and she was referred specifically to the U.S. blockade against Cuba that has caused several and profound marks on Cuba's economy and prohibits that Cuba economic develops as it should. Also on his speech, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who is here in Havana to preside this meeting, was saying that not only economy is one of the main focuses of ECLAC, but also the work against climate change because the world is suffering serious consequences, and he referred in this case to the damages caused by last hurricane season in the Caribbean, when countries of this region were seriously affected. He also, in this opening ceremony, also Mexico transferred to Cuba the temporary presidency of CLAC, and for the coming 2 years, Cuba will be presiding the works of this regional group. On his closing words, the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, said that Cuba is compromised to work with this regional group in the better development of the region and the area, and also that Cuba is compromised with the development of itself as a sovereign nation. In this ceremony, also the group La Colmenita acted for the participants, and it was a very profound moment because the children connected with the participants in this ceremony, and they all shared happiness and laugh and dances. And this is what's been taking place here at the Palace of Conventions of Havana, and we'll continue here telling you what develops here.
Laura Prada from Cuba. In Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado has been sworn in as the nation's new president. The 38-year-old promised a plural and inclusive government. The election was very divisive, especially when it came to LGBT issues. During his inaugural speech, Alvarado said he will face the biggest challenges ahead with the support of the people and his vice president, Epsi Campbell.
I invite you all to work together to recover our capacity to believe in ourselves and what we can achieve. We have the ethical and historical obligation of being consistent with our legacy of peace, democracy, and respect for the environment. As heirs of the tradition, we have a role to play in the international arena in the times of uncertainty, in the face of threats like climate change or movements that jeopardize democracy and fundamental rights. To offer our hands to those who need it the most, and respect all human rights for everyone. In that diversity, we are richer.
Let's hear from our correspondent Fernando Francia, who has more from Inauguration Day in Costa Rica.
This is a historic day for Costa Ricans, as they celebrate the change of president, from Luis Guillermo Solís to Carlos Alvarado, the 48th president in Costa Rica's history, and also the youngest one of the last 100 years and of the Second Republic. Alvarado takes office facing many challenges, mostly fiscal and economic. He has the duty to bring progress to the country. He said that we'll apply austerity policies. Some members of the opposition said that they must be applied to the business people who evade taxes and not to the common workers. This is the reason for the protests taking place outside. You can see the many police officers gathered here. Alvarado's first act was to form a cabinet, followed by others related to austerity and transparency, the main axis of his government plan. 109 international delegations attended the event, but there were only 7 presidents of those. The most applauded was Evo Morales, Bolivia's president, who was also here in 2014. So that's all from here, where Carlos Alvarado has been sworn in as the new president of Costa Rica.
I was Fernando Francia from San Jose. Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernández has announced that he will be visiting the United States to help regulate the status of 57,000 Hondurans with temporary protection status, the TPS. Hernández made the announcement after the U.S. administration said on Friday it will rescind the TPS visa for the 57,000 Hondurans who benefit from the status living in the United States since 1999. The Honduran president already held a video conference on Monday with Honduran consulate leaders in the U.S. and the government's newly formed Migration Working Group to discuss ways to protect Hondurans in the country. Police in Suriname have detained 13 suspects accused of killing at least 16 Guyanese fishermen last month. Dozens of others are being questioned. It is one of the deadliest pirate attacks off the Atlantic coast in recent times. On April 27, 4 boats with over 20 fishermen were attacked by pirates off Suriname. Only 5 fishermen survived the attack. They recalled horrific details of how the pirates beat them, attacked them with machetes, and threw some of the bodies overboard. The mayor of Cape Town, South Africa's second largest city, has been ousted by her own party after her administration came under fire over mismanagement and alleged corruption. Patricia de Lille was criticized for her handling of Cape Town's water crisis and over allegations of corruption, leading to 2 investigations that flawed her conduct. She said she would be heading to court to challenge the clause invoked by the party to remove her from office.
Now, once again, the DA's desperation has led to them taking another shortcut to get rid of me before following due process.
And we end with news that a 38-year-old Russian quadruple amputee diver has set a new world record by plunging 40 meters down into the Red Sea on Monday. Dmitry Pavlenko lost his arms and legs as a result of a grenade explosion at the age of 19. However, he went on to receive a diploma in psychology and developed a keen interest in diving. Although he was supervised by 5 other divers, none of them were allowed to touch him unless he showed signs of trouble. Pavlenko believes this is his way of encouraging others to see that there are no limits to what they can achieve, whether for an amputee or for an able-bodied person. And with that story, we come to the end of this news brief. But this and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And be sure to follow us on social media as well, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla González. Thank you for watching.
Yes, I called him today.